What happens when the First Lady gets called out for spending taxpayer dollars on luxury events, and her teenage son responds by calling the cops on a Congresswoman? Stay tuned, this story is about to get wild. Jasmine Crockett did not back away. She doubled down. Look, if taxpayers are paying for designer caviar and orchids brought in from elsewhere while school lunch programs are being cut, we have a right to question. That was the line spoken with Jasmine Crockett's characteristic calm but sharp tone in a live interview on Inside the Beltway. It wasn't simply a policy dig. It was a low blow at First Lady Melania Trump. The topic of the segment was supposed to be federal budget transparency, but by the time Jasmine leaned in and spoke those words, all else was lost. The host attempted to course correct, but he wasn't prepared. Congresswoman Crockett, are you saying that the First Lady is? I'm not implying, she cut in, not raising her voice, not flinching. I'm saying we've seen the records. If the White House wants to deny it, they can, but don't pretend this is new. No stammer, no grin, just facts. The studio fell into an awkward silence. The camera stayed tight on her face for a half-second too long before the director cut to commercial. Back in Dallas, her phone started vibrating. Texts, missed calls. Ava DeWitt, her chief of staff, was already waiting outside the studio. That clip's going viral, Ava said, holding up her phone. Some folks are losing it. You're trending. Jasmine smiled half-heartedly. Good. Let them. Perhaps now they'll listen. She didn't want to be viral. She wanted what wasn't being addressed. Months of oversight committee hearings, letters written and dismissed, FOIA requests stonewalled. Melania Trump's private parties at Mar-a-Lago kept surfacing in classified expense reports. It wasn't technically illegal, but it reeked. And Jasmine wasn't in the habit of overlooking the stench. By the time she arrived at her D.C. apartment, the interview clip had reached 2 million views. Conservative commentators were labeling it an unprovoked assault, while some liberal pundits applauded her courage, but most played it safe. Melania had kept herself largely outside of politics in public, and attacking the First Lady, particularly this particular First Lady, wasn't a good move. Jasmine didn't bat an eye. That evening on the late broadcast of Cable Watch Tonight, a roundtable analyzed the moment, running the clip twice. I believe she violated the line, one of the former press secretaries declared. She didn't lie, though, one of the other roundtable participants responded. Intent counts. The first one snapped, but more important was the crowd on social media. People weren't arguing intent, they were fact-checking. Budget spreadsheet screenshots popped up. Threads detailed how specific line items related to Mar-a-Lago catering bills. It was boring, it was convoluted, but Jasmine had done something most people hadn't done in months. She talked clearly. No beating around the bush. And it resonated. Even individuals who weren't political junkies began discussing it. Was it right for Melania to have private parties on taxpayer funds? Should Barron Trump's 18th birthday cost what it did? At midnight, Jasmine made a public post on Instagram. Public funds are for the public. If that offends you, ask yourself why. By the time morning came, the actual storm hadn't even begun. But some member of the Trump family was already getting ready to make it personal. Jasmine had just cracked into her second cup of coffee when a landline rang, not her cell, but her office line. Ava answered it. Congresswoman Crockett's office. There was a moment of silence. Ava's eyebrow ticked upward. Yes, hold on. She placed the receiver against her shoulder. It's someone from the D.C. Metro Police. They're requesting to talk to you personally, Ava told her, and her tone was slightly trembling. Jasmine didn't flinch. Send them through. She'd answered phones from all sorts of officials, some nicer than others, but there was a look on Ava's face that made her hesitate for just a fraction before answering. This is Representative Crockett, she replied. Good morning, ma'am. This is Sergeant DeLuca with the D.C. Metropolitan Police. Last night, we had a report of a harassment complaint made against you. Jasmine slowly blinked. I'm sorry, what? Yes, ma'am. A harassment complaint. The complainer is Mr. Barron Trump. He says your on-air comments singled out his mother and were a security issue. Jasmine gazed at the distant wall, speechless. I have to make it clear, this isn't an official complaint, DeLuca went on. But due to the complainant status, we had to document the incident and report it to your office. A harassment complaint? For what? Jasmine didn't bother to conceal the incredulity. You're telling me an 18-year-old made a police complaint over a TV interview? DeLuca paused. That is correct, ma'am. She let out a brief, dry laugh. All right, Sergeant, you have my statement. Now, anything else? No, ma'am. We'll close the report unless we get further complaints. Sorry for the trouble. She hung up without saying anything else. Ava was observing. What the hell was that? Barron Trump complained because I told him his mom hosts fancy parties? Jasmine massaged her temple. That can't be real. It is. And now, thanks to protocol, we've got a harassment report floating around the department's servers. Ava sat down slowly. You think it was really him, or someone put him up to it? Jasmine didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew it took less than an hour for the story to leak. A local politics website broke it first, reporting Barron Trump accuses reporter Jasmine Crockett of harassment. They quoted law enforcement sources, which likely meant that someone's cousin in the night shift forwarded a screenshot. Daily Journal by noon picked it up. Then Capital Lens. And then the conservative news machine burst into action. What type of grown woman harasses the First Lady and involves her son in a call to the police? A red-faced pundit bellowed on television. This is what extremism is. They omitted the section where no one from Jasmine's office had called the Trumps. They glossed over the detail that it was Barron who made the call to the police. Jasmine didn't blink. She simply observed in silence as the narrative distorted. At 1:15 p.m., she emerged from her Capitol Hill office, confronted a cluster of reporters, and declared in a forceful voice, I have not once contacted the Trump family in any personal capacity. My remarks were made about a pattern of questionable expenditure which impacts American taxpayers. That is my work. Are you accusing the Trump family of retaliating? A reporter shouted. I'm saying a fact, replied Jasmine, her tone firm. When a member of Congress in office makes a public comment based on publicly financed activities, that is not harassment. That is oversight. She didn't shout. She didn't grin. Another journalist yelled, Will you apologize? Jasmine kept her eyes focused ahead. No. Behind her, Ava was already writing a quick release. It would go up before the 2 p.m. news dump, before it could be spun some more. But Jasmine did not anticipate the outpouring of support that started building quietly. It began in group chats, then on Instagram stories, then in the comments of all viral news posts. It wasn't limited to political colleagues. It was young adults, women, veterans, teachers, people who didn't typically care about committee hearings or budget line items. They weren't watching anymore. And within the White House residence, somebody had to explain to the First Lady why her teenager son had made a harassment complaint against the Congresswoman. But by then, they already knew what the internet had chosen. By 4 p.m., cable TV was a circus. 3 split screens broadcasted Jasmine's press release, an aerial view of Mar-a-Lago, and vintage footage of Barron Trump from years ago. Since no one had anything recent, they never ceased speculating, making this out to be like anything near normal. On Capitol Circuit, a host bluntly stated, We have no precedent for a president's son engaging law enforcement over congressional oversight. His co-host responded, We also have no precedent for a congresswoman challenging the First Lady this directly. But viewers weren't swallowing the both sides line. Folks had had enough. Jasmine's fans began screenshooting the original interview clip and reposting it with captions such as, This is harassment? Call the police over this. A blurry video appeared on a Mar-a-Lago staffer account of a champagne reception with Melania passing by an ice sculpture of a bald eagle. The timestamp coincided with one of the offending expense reports Jasmine had pointed out weeks ago. It didn't prove all of it, but it aligned enough to get people talking. On TikTok, people stitched Jasmine's quote to school budget cut headlines, and others displayed statistics on housing instability. All the clips cut with someone saying, "But they called the cops on her." Ava phoned from the office. "We've got media booking requests out of left field. Everybody from The View to a radio show in Milwaukee. And then there's a candle store in Ohio sending you a gift basket." Jasmine barely cracked a tiny smile. "Tell them I like the lavender." But beneath the calm, things were happening too quickly, and Jasmine knew not to count her chickens. Later that night, her phone vibrated once more. It was Charles Drummond, a seasoned civil rights lawyer from Baltimore. "You know you're in the crosshairs, don't you?" he stated abruptly. "I assumed," Jasmine said. "This wasn't about shame," Charles added. "It was an intimidation game. Had you panicked, deleted your tweet, or apologized, they could have claimed innocence." Jasmine leaned back, speechless. "But you didn't," Charles added. "And now they overplayed. They politicized a policy discussion into a personal brawl." Jasmine liked Charles because he never spoke with 10 words when 4 would suffice. He got the heart of the matter. She needed him to right now. "Am I worried?" she asked. "No," he said. "You need to be louder." Jasmine took a deep breath. That evening, rather than going home, Jasmine recorded a brief video from her building. No makeup, no lighting team. Just her and her words. "If asking questions about government spending is now a crime, then we've lost the thread of democracy." She let the silence after that line sit for just a few seconds. Then, without hesitating, she posted it to her personal page and went to bed. By morning, it had more than 4 million views. The world was abuzz, and while the mainstream media were scrambling, playing nice while navigating politics, regular folks weren't being diplomatic. Jasmine Crockett had just called out the grift, and they summoned the police. A whisper hashtag started to percolate, hidden initially in a response thread beneath her video, and it read, "I said stand with Crockett." By lunchtime, it was everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, even Facebook groups that only ever shared dog photos and school bake sales. Celebrities joined in, and it wasn't long before it wasn't just political insiders. Former prosecutors, teachers' unions, grassroots activists, and some black vets spearheaded a campaign on X. They shared past records of service with headings that read, "We fought for this country, she's fighting for its truth." Meanwhile, the White House hadn't made a single public statement, and within Jasmine's office, Ava's phone was ringing nonstop. "Jazz," she said, poking her head into the room, "BuzzFeed wants a statement, TMZ too. Oh, and a woman from Kansas sent you a handmade quilt with your name on it alongside Shirley Chisholm's." Jasmine laughed it off. "Please don't let me become merch." Ava leaned her head and said, "Too late." But not everybody was partying. Offstage, a few influential players were already reassembling, attempting to calculate how one TV statement had set off a national reckoning. They weren't going to let it pass. By Friday morning, Jasmine Crockett had had her fill of the din. She wasn't going to let the public's mood swing on sound bites or cable spin. She wanted the public to see the truth for themselves, not through edited clips or skewed headlines, but through raw, unfiltered evidence. She told Ava, "We're releasing everything, full transparency. No summaries, just evidence." Ava paused. "That's going to make some folks downright nervous." Jasmine blinked not once. "Good. They should be." That afternoon, her staff posted a detailed PDF to the congressional website called Expense Records tied to the Office of the First Lady, reviewed by the Oversight Subcommittee. There were redacted receipts, itemized service invoices, and memos for the last 2 fiscal quarters. The documents were dry, technical, but damning. One memo showed a request for payment of $137,000 labeled Decorative Floral Ambiance for a function at Mar-a-Lago. Another indicated $9,400 charges for bespoke spa treatments for non-employee guests. Hidden among it all was one memo from a lower-ranking staffer cautioning that some charges may raise public concern if examined closely. Jasmine highlighted that sentence in red and shared it on Twitter with a big "they knew." The genuine hammer, though, arrived when Jasmine's office dropped the entire call log from her office phones and personal cell for the 48 hours prior to and after the interview. No calls, no texts, no emails to or from the Trump family, their legal team, or the White House. Let's be clear, Jasmine explained in a brief video press release. There was no contact, no private message, no harassment campaign. I did my work openly in public. What ensued was a deliberate effort to intimidate and smear. She didn't flinch as she gazed into the camera. And I won't play along. Charles Drummond, a civil rights lawyer, monitored the press release from his Baltimore office. He immediately phoned Ava. "Still spying for that woman." Ava glared at Jasmine across the room and said she's exhausted, but she's not going down. The press couldn't deny the receipts. CNN had a government accountability expert discuss line by line what was supposed to be done with the Office of the First Lady's money, then compare it to Jasmine's report. The expert said, "Look, we're not talking about napkin budgets here. These are significant expenditures with no clear justification. If anything, Congresswoman Crockett's oversight is exactly what's supposed to happen." Meanwhile, right-wing sources panicked. Some changed the subject, and others started suggesting that the documents were being misunderstood or quoted out of context. One right-wing network anchor asked, "Do Americans care if Melania wants to have a nice party?" The response in the comments said it all. "With our money, yeah, we care." That evening, Jasmine spent at home on the couch, folded legs under her, TV muted, phone open. She read through messages: a teacher in Arizona, a nurse from Ohio, a retired Marine from Florida. Hundreds of individuals thanking her, not because they were interested in politics, but because they were sick of being ignored as the powerful moved untouchable. Her favorite email was from a teenage girl in Iowa who wrote, "I didn't know Congresswomen could do that. Thank you for not being afraid." Jasmine smiled gently, but just as she was beginning to breathe out, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Ava. "Call me as soon as possible. You're not going to like this." Jasmine called. "What now?" Ava was tight. "Someone just posted a leaked partial internal memo from the First Lady's office to a blog. They are attempting to claim you have a personal grudge against Melania. And they're insinuating, well, they're suggesting it's about race." Jasmine did not yell. She did not curse. She simply said, "So they're going low." Ava nodded on the phone. "And you know what that means?" "Yes," Jasmine said, grasping her laptop. "Time to go even higher." By Saturday morning, Jasmine Crockett wasn't only a trending name. She was the focal point of an emerging cultural flashpoint. The initially pointed critique of a budget had ballooned into a national debate over power, race, and who can speak without reprisal. The leak from the First Lady's office only added fuel to the fire. The language in the memo, aggressively targeting traditional institutions and lacking decorum, did not have to be so explicit. Everyone knew precisely what those coded terms implied, and the internet was not pleased. Jasmine's defenders massed in every comment thread, tweet, and article, not only in support, but in flames. Clips appeared referencing moments throughout history when Black women had been disciplined for speaking too clearly, too confidently, too truthfully. A clip of Anita Hill played alongside Jasmine's interview, a montage of Shirley Chisholm's speeches cut to photographs of Jasmine's press conferences. On TikTok, a social worker from Tulsa, who is no longer employed, posted a raw, unfiltered clip. And now they're calling the cops on her? For what? Doing her job while Black? That clip alone had over 800,000 likes within 12 hours. Ava could barely keep up with the surge. Her team had doubled overnight, volunteers and interns jumping in to sort DMs, schedule interviews, and manage the waves of attention. One of the emails came from Pastor Roland Jeffries in Sacramento. It was short, Tell Congresswoman Crockett our church is praying for her strength, and tell her we've got her back all the way. The pressure continued to mount, but Jasmine never once acted as the victim. She did not have to. She instead uploaded a 14-second clip. I was elected to ask questions, to speak when others whisper. That job doesn't stop because someone's uncomfortable. That video itself was posted more than 20,000 times, and yet, amidst the melee, the other side began to crumble. Anonymous sources within the Trump camp began to speak in hushed tones, then increasingly loudly. A high-profile political columnist penned a thread stating Barron's complaint could have been filed without complete legal scrutiny. Another stated staff were racing to manage optics regarding the First Lady's involvement. A screenshot leaked from a group chat involving campaign advisors with a message that read, "We should have ignored her. This is getting out of hand." Back in Jasmine's apartment, the mood was cautious but focused. Ava handed Jasmine a tablet. "There's more. You're getting invited to speak at the University of Michigan next month and Georgetown. 2 national women's orgs are asking if you'll keynote their fall conferences." Jasmine swallowed the tablet, her gaze roaming. "This wasn't the plan," she said, not bitter, not thrilled, just true. "I know," Ava said, "but you hit something real. People don't want the slick script anymore. They want authenticity." Protests had begun forming outside, not angry mobs, but people gathering with signs that read, "Truth isn't harassment. Questioning power isn't a crime. We see you, Jasmine." In Philadelphia, a mural painter started drawing a giant portrait of Jasmine's face next to a caption from her Instagram post. By the weekend's end, it would be complete and splashed by local media. Meanwhile, TV anchors were racing to spin their talking points. The story was getting away from them. One seasoned journalist phrased it bluntly on a panel. Regardless of your side, the fact that a first son called the police about a congressional question is odd. This is not politics. Offstage, the Trump communications team had changed tactics. They ceased to name-check Jasmine Crockett and ceased to respond to the harassment allegation. Whispers began to circulate that Barron Trump had been told to remain as far away from the limelight as possible. No more public declarations, no interviews, nothing. The harm was already done. But while they were in retreat, Jasmine's tail was just starting to grow. Within the White House East Wing, the mood was strained. Melania Trump stood beside her tall office windows, arms folded across her chest, face inscrutable. A barely audible hum of voices on the other side of the shut door was the sole indication that a number of aides were still arguing about how to quell what had become a public relations firestorm in short order. Her chief of staff, Annetta Kohler, entered gingerly. "We've written a statement," she said, but paused. "It's dangerous. Anything we put out now could rekindle the story," Annetta supplied, voice guarded. Melania did not turn around. "I warned him not to respond." Annetta nodded softly. "He's young. He believed he was defending you." Melania spun around. "Defending me from what? A congresswoman seeking answers?" The room went silent. Nobody felt safe enough to respond. And behind-the-scenes maneuvering, the Trump inner circle was in panic. Donors began calling. Some Senate allies quietly raised alarm. One went so far as to recommend that they stay away from the scandal altogether. The issue wasn't Jasmine's statement, it was the receipts. Those receipts had landed like a slap. Every time a spokesperson attempted to spin the issue, another reporter asked about a line item. "How do you explain $23,000 to crystal table settings?" Another asked, "What is the explanation for a $17,000 gelato bar?" The budget office would not comment. The ethics committee indicated that they were considering the materials. Meanwhile, all attempts at damage control only served to make Jasmine more powerful. Within the home, Barron had fallen silent. To someone close to the family, he hadn't anticipated the backlash. He believed he was being loyal, but the media frenzy turned him into a punchline, and not the kind he desired. On Reddit, there was a satirical account by someone impersonating his lawyer. On Instagram, there were people posting memes teasing him, "Barron Trump, the only teen who calls 911 over budget oversight. Privately, Melania was apoplectic, not at Jasmine, not even at the media, but at her own staff. This was preventable, she fumed between clenched teeth. They made her seem honest, principled. Annetta answered back, her voice little more than a whisper. She is honest. But Melania did not answer. Her thoughts were elsewhere, undefined. Meanwhile, in D.C., Jasmine remained on task. She didn't care if Barron regretted what he had done. She wasn't seeking retractions or apologies. Her task had not changed. But the stress in private behind closed doors at the White House was leaking out into the open. A senior staffer in the First Lady's office suddenly quit, no explanation. Another was transferred to a not-so-well-known position in a regional advisory role. When the press inquired, they were informed normal internal shifts. But nobody believed it. Charles Drummond phoned again. "You've got them rattled," he declared, his tone knowing. Jasmine propped herself against her desk, her arms folded. "I don't care about rattling. I care about consequences." Charles paused. "Exactly. And you've created a moment where people are finally paying attention. Don't let up." She didn't plan to. That afternoon, an unnamed aide leaked an internal memo suggesting that Melania's office had warned Barron not to act impulsively after the interview aired. The memo read, "We advised against response. Exposure risk is high. Outcome unpredictable." The public recognized it for what it was: damage control, thinly disguised apology, and perhaps even a furtive effort to deflect blame onto an 18-year-old. But Jasmine did not say anything. She was preoccupied going over new papers just released from a watch group. One of them illustrated a request for reimbursement for a private party thrown by a European jewelry company. The incident had taken place within the ballroom of Mar-a-Lago, and the bill was invoiced to the office of the First Lady. Eva's gaze went from the file, her eyes wide with alarm. This is worse than we had imagined." Jasmine did not blink. "Then we proceed." It wasn't about one party, one incident, or even one grievance. It was about a pattern of power defending itself and resorting to intimidation when challenged. The people understood it. Jasmine understood it. And in the closed doors of the White House, they feared it. But what they dreaded most was that she was not backing down, and neither were those standing with her. By midweek, the narrative had evolved. It was not longer a matter of one interview or a teenage girl's ill-conceived police call. It had become something greater, louder, more profound, a public accounting. The House Oversight Committee said it would conduct a special review of all non-essential spending connected to the office of the First Lady, officially but quietly, and that made all the difference. Jasmine sat in her office, reading the hearing announcement roll across the bottom of the TV screen. Ava stood next to her, arms folded, jaw clenched. "You goaded them," Ava said, her tone controlled. "Now they must react." Jasmine nodded reluctantly. "They can't continue to pretend that this is all about hurt feelings." At the same time, prominent news sources started digging into past Trump administration expense reports. Step by step, minor publications started digging up hidden stories and forgotten budget issues. Things that hadn't made a splash previously, but now that the focus of the public was fixed, everything seemed different. A reporter for the Sacramento Review discovered a vendor that charged $44,000 for private fragrance coordination at a 2022 gala organized by Melania. Another publication revealed that a number of private luxury car rentals, Lamborghinis, Bentleys, had been listed as written-offs as VIP guest transport. Some of those parties hadn't even had official White House personnel. "Lavish doesn't even come close," a reporter told viewers live. "If these were corporate expenses, someone would have been fired." And yet Jasmine still hadn't made it personal. She stayed on message, always pointed, always clear, but never petty. That restraint only strengthened her image. She wasn't seeking drama. She was demanding accountability. The public noticed. They reacted. In Milwaukee, retired postal workers got together to write letters to Congress calling for complete openness on First Lady spending. They named it the People's Oversight. In Little Rock, a band of college students staged a teach-in on federal spending and ethics. A young presenter concluded her speech with Jasmine's words, "Public money is not private property." Meanwhile, Melania had vanished from public view. No photo ops, no statements, no tweets. The silence was loud, but not everyone stayed quiet. Congressman Howell Vernon, a senior Republican from Idaho, went live on Midday Nation and stumbled through an awkward defense. "I think we're blowing this out of proportion," he said. "So what if there were a few parties? Washington's always been about tradition and ceremony." Jasmine's fans clung to the clip as a bone. One of them responded on TikTok, "Did he just say tradition is worth $137,000 in orchids?" Even right-wing voters began to get nervous, not due to politics, but because the tale was getting too familiar. A caller to a talk radio station in the Midwest claimed, "I don't care who's in charge, I'm a working mom. If I spent company funds to give my girlfriends a spa day, I'd lose my job. So why is this any different?" A week later, Jasmine received the offer to be a witness at the impending committee hearing. She didn't hesitate. Ava's team arranged closed-door sessions, rehearsed possible questions, and went through all the files one by one again in the preceding days. They left no stone unturned. "This isn't a hearing," Eva declared late one evening as they worked in the office after hours. "This is the moment." Jasmine glanced up from her notes. "Then we make it count." Nationwide, expectation mounted. People weren't merely interested anymore. They cared. They wanted to know how much farther this would go, whether accountability might actually prevail. On the day of the hearing, protesters rallied outside the Capitol. Some carried signs that read, "We paid for the party, where's our invite?" Others read, "Crockett is courage." Inside, Jasmine stood before the committee wearing a navy blue blazer. No jewelry, no bright colors, only paper, facts, and presence. She made eye contact with each member as she started. "My responsibility is not to make people comfortable. It's to speak the truth, no matter if it offends the powerful or not." Silence. And then the question started. But before the first even got finished, it was obvious. The tide had shifted, and no one could unring the bell. Less than 48 hours after Jasmine's hearing, the machine struck back. On a Tuesday morning, just when momentum for the review by the committee was at its peak, a tabloid website published a front-page headline, "Congresswoman Crockett accused of aggressive behavior during law school years." It was a thin story based on unnamed former law school classmates and vaguely stating a contentious campus debate more than a decade earlier. No complaint on file, no formal complaint, just words such as confrontational tone and made others uncomfortable. Eva strode into Jasmine's office with the printed article in her hand. "They're scraping the bottom now." Jasmine took a glance at it. "They want to make people jump. Make me look unstable." "They're hoping I'll respond emotionally so that they can say, 'See, we told you.'" Eva nodded. "Do we react?" "No," Jasmine replied bluntly. "We look ahead. The public isn't stupid. They'll see the timing." But while they waved it off, more pieces began falling into place. A longtime donor publicly rescinded support, terming her divisive. Conservative talk radio host aired a 10-minute tirade labeling Jasmine a radical feminist with a grudge. On the surface, it seemed like a smear campaign. Behind the scenes, it was precisely that. Leaked emails later indicated that a PR company with ties to an incoming administration official had been pitching the stories for days, shopping them to any outlet willing to take a bite. But the blows just kept falling. Somebody dug up video of Jasmine protesting years ago, leading a chant with a bullhorn. The caption distorted it into "Crockett fostered anti-government views." The video actually had her saying, "If the government won't serve the people have the right to protest." It didn't take. The more they attempted to portray her as volatile, the more steady she seemed. In public, Jasmine doubled down on policy. She conducted a measured interview on NPR. She attended a housing forum in Memphis. She hosted a town hall in Gary, Indiana, with no reporters, just residents, notebooks, and a folding table with tepid coffee. The next evening, at the town hall meeting, a retired school bus driver got up and exclaimed, "I don't know anything about DC games, but I know when someone's speaking the truth. Keep your head up." Jasmine smiled, shook his hand, and continued on. But Ava noticed the fatigue, not on her face, not in her voice, but in the way she lingered at the office longer than usual, in the quiet gaps between interviews, and the way she rereads some of the same documents she'd already memorized. "People think you're iron," Ava said one night, "but it's okay if it's wearing on you." Jasmine didn't look up from her desk. "It's not me I'm worried about. It's the message." In a world of quick takes and scandal cycles, Jasmine knew this could all disappear in a week, buried under the next controversy, forgotten before it led to any real change. That's what the pushback was counting on: wear her down, discredit her, outlast the headlines. But they hadn't counted on the buzz she'd already caused. A team of whistleblowers stepped forward, anonymously, through a watchdog agency confirming that budget reports had previously been massaged before being stored away. Not against the law, but certainly deceptive. Jasmine didn't rub it in. She just continued. She reposted the story simply with these words: "Sunlight reveals everything." In a tactical maneuver, some Republican staff members cut off all conversation, hoping quiet would stem the tide. It didn't. At a panel on Civic Point, a former federal ethics counselor described simply, "Congresswoman Crockett didn't just ask a question. She made the system look in the mirror." That's what they fear. At the end of the week, Jasmine's approval ratings had crept up, not among politicians, but by people. The pushback continued, still vociferous, but now weaker, sloppy, predictable. For once the truth begins filtering through the gaps, no smear campaign can seal it shut. Jasmine recognized this was not the finish line. It was merely the rim of something deeper. The invitation was in a simple white envelope, no logo, no seal, just her name typed neatly across the front. Within, a single card, St. Louis Public Forum Series, guest speaker invitation. Topic: Power, Integrity, and Public Accountability in American Politics. Location: Harris Stowe State University. Ava balanced the card between her fingers. "You want to do this one?" Jasmine didn't need to think. "Yeah, I do." It wasn't a fundraiser. It wasn't national television. It was an opportunity to address people directly who lived with the fallout of what others termed oversight. The Harris Stowe Auditorium was full. Students, retired teachers, parents with strollers at the back. A small table near the front contained one bottle of water and a frayed microphone with a loose cord. No grand entrance, no music. Simply Jasmine walking to the podium, fiddling with the mic. She held her silence until the room fell still. "When I first campaigned," she said, "I didn't have wealthy donors or slick commercials. What I had was a promise to tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable." She gazed out over the sea of faces, rows of open eyes, open notebooks, hushed reverence. "And when I talked about where our money was going, how privilege and luxury are being protected and basic needs aren't being met, I wasn't trying to outrage. I was just doing my job." The reaction she got: "That wasn't about me," she continued. "That was about a system so used to silence it panics when someone refuses to whisper." The room stayed still, not frozen, just deeply focused. "I'm not here to drag names or make noise," Jasmine went on. "I'm here to remind us that questioning power isn't disrespect, it's responsibility." She didn't read from cards. She didn't look at a teleprompter. It was merely herself, the burden of the last several weeks in her voice, but not breaking it. She continued to speak of public trust, how hardworking families had a right to know where their money was spent. She spoke of the subtle trend of revenge when individuals reached too near the reality. "There's a reason why they attempted to discredit me rather than respond to the question," she maintained, her voice firm. because they knew they couldn't defend what has been going on behind those closed doors. People began nodding. I wasn't furious when I spoke up. I was concentrated, she went on, but I got labeled aggressive. I wasn't exaggerating, but I got labeled divisive. I wasn't emotional. I was prepared. And yet they still attempted to portray me as unstable. Sighs of assent coursed through the crowd. She finished on this note: if this is what transpires when a black woman poses a question, imagine what transpires when she seeks answers. The room erupted not with fanfare, but with affirmation. It was honest, raw, and earned. Afterwards, students lined up, not for selfies, but for handshakes. Parents pulled her aside to thank her for showing their kids what integrity looked like. One elderly man clutched her hand with both of his and whispered, "You're not just speaking, you're waking people up." Back in the vehicle, Ava occupied the front seat, reading from her phone. That address is all over the place. Someone recorded it and uploaded it with the caption, "She said what we were all thinking." Already 1 million hits. Jasmine rested her head on the seat. I wasn't tired, I was just still. It wasn't clicks, she said. I know, Ava said, but it landed. Over that weekend, churches around the nation played excerpts of the speech during announcements at church. Community centers began debating transparency and city budgets. Debate teams at high schools used her quotes in state competitions. Jasmine was no longer just a congresswoman. She'd become a mirror, and people were finally gazing upon the reflection they'd paid too little attention to for so long. Naturally, not everyone approved of what they were seeing. Rumors of official investigations began circulating, not into Jasmine, but into the budgeting practices surrounding the office of the First Lady. A handful of senior staff members quietly revised their CVS donors, withdrew from public affiliations. Lobbyists altered their rhetoric. One political reporter wrote, Crockett didn't ruin anyone's career. She didn't embarrass. She posed one simple question, and the whole edifice winced. But the actual change wasn't occurring in headlines. It was occurring in kitchen tables, break rooms, and living rooms nationwide. It had been 3 weeks since the name of Elena Ford's guest, Jasmine Crockett, had first exploded into the national dialogue. Today, she was perched on a worn leather sofa in front of seasoned journalist Elena Ford, inside a quiet PBS studio in Kansas City. No makeup artists, no commercials. Just 2 women and some cameras quietly rolling in the background. Elena leaned forward. Do you think they would have done things any differently if you hadn't spoken of Melania Trump by name? Jasmine breathed, not deep, not practiced. Perhaps, but then it would not have been the truth. She didn't say it with arrogance. Smugness wasn't in her voice, only clarity. Elena nodded slowly. Was there a point where you wished you hadn't said it? Jasmine gazed off for a moment, as though reciting all this in her mind. The only thing I regretted, she explained, was to underestimate how far some will go to maintain the illusion of respectability. She sat back, hands clasped in her lap. When you're a black woman in public life, you're always walking between being direct and being difficult, being honest and being described as angry. So you choose your words. You anticipate the backlash. But what you can't anticipate is the moment that they attempt to make your integrity the issue rather than their behavior. There was silence in the room that wasn't uncomfortable. It was respect. Elena said, What helped you make it through? Jasmine smiled barely. The people. All of them. The ones who wrote me messages from hospital beds, classrooms, little towns I've never even visited. People who said, don't stop. She looked straight into the lens now. Not at the host, not for politics, not for drama, just for truth. This wasn't just about budgets or parties or one teenager's phone call. It was about whether honesty still means something, whether we're allowed to hold people accountable no matter who they married or where they live. She let that hang in the air. Outside the TV studio, matters had moved elsewhere. The Ethics Review Board had officially opened a full investigation into discretionary spending in the First Lady's office. A handful of subpoenas had gone out under the radar. Melania had not been publicly spotted since, and the term Crockett Standard was being utilized in Capitol Hill briefings to indicate how much documentation would be required when spending public money. Jasmine didn't brag about that. She didn't tweet it. She didn't have to. Her role wasn't to be a hero. It was to ask questions and open the door for truth to enter. Weeks later, when the story had peaked, Jasmine went to visit a Dayton, Ohio, public school. No fanfare, just an impromptu visit set up by a history teacher who'd presented her hearing testimony in class. In a tiny gymnasium, a 13-year-old girl stood up in the back of the Q&A and asked, "How did you not get scared when they tried to come after you?" Jasmine smiled. "Oh, I was afraid. But I was tired too. Tired of seeing people back down because some big person glared at them." And sometimes, when you're tired enough, you don't care what they'll do anymore, and you care about what they might do if you don't say anything. The girl nodded, as if she knew, even though she couldn't tell how. That evening, Jasmine entered her apartment, took off her shoes, and sat quietly for a bit. The commotion had ceased, but something remained. Not fear. Not fatigue. Purpose. She scrolled through her phone one last time before going to sleep. A message was unread from an unknown number. It just said, "They thought you'd fold. Instead, you lit a path." She closed her phone and whispered aloud, almost to herself, "We're not done." Because the story wasn't about a first lady or a phone call or a viral hashtag. It was about truth and what it cost to speak it out loud. And now, more people were willing to pay that price. If you believe in standing your ground, holding power accountable, and protecting voices that refuse to stay quiet, subscribe, share, and keep this conversation going. Because silence only serves those who hope we won't notice. If you trust that the truth is powerful, that it's okay to stand up even when the world colludes to keep you quiet, hit the subscribe button, like this video, and share it. Share it with all who need to know that their voice counts. Because the battle for justice and transparency doesn't stop here. It begins with us, with you. Let's continue the conversation because the truth is stronger than to be silenced.